It is hard to believe that between 1994 and 2015, South African Airways was always recognized as Africa's leading airline by the World Travel Awards. This is no longer the case, and a further decline of the airline's fortunes have seen it lose its position as the biggest airline in Africa, a position that Ethiopian Airline has gladly accepted with no challenge whatsoever from either South African Airways or any other airline in Africa for that matter. However, South African national carrier isn't in trouble because it no longer wins top awards or it no longer is the number one airline in Africa. It is in trouble because even while it was winning industry honors and accolades and held those positions that it did, it had been racking up unsustainable levels of debt of up to $3.9 billion since 1994. In fact, it last made a profit back in 2011 and has not published its financial results since 2017, when it lost the equivalent of $190 million, about $20 for every passenger flown. So, what happened to South African Airways? In this video, we will try to decipher the ins and outs of what led to the decline of this major airline. But before we start, I would like to welcome you to my channel. Please consider subscribing and don't forget to hit the bell icon if you enjoy this video. It would be unfair to talk about South African Airways without going back in time to retrace its history of when and how it began. South African Airways is an old airline. It began its operations over 80 years ago on 1st February 1934, when the South African government took over the assets and liabilities of Union Airways, the first South African commercial airline that operated between 1929 and 1934. After the government takeover, the airline was renamed South African Airways and fell under the control of the South African Railways and Harbour Administration. On 1st November the same year, South African Airways introduced Junkers Ju-52, the first multi-engine aircraft on its domestic routes. During the same decade, the airline steadily acquired more planes, including the first 10-seater Junkers Ju-86, DC-3s, Constellation L749As, Lockheed Lodestar, DC-7Bs, Vickers Viscounts, and Boeing 707. In November 1945, the airline introduced the Springbok service, its first international continental service. The flight would take off from South Africa with stops in Nairobi, Kenya, Khartoum in Sudan, Cairo in Egypt, Castel Benito in Italian Libya, and Bournemouth in the United Kingdom. It took approximately 34 hours. In 1953, South African Airways became the first airline in the world outside the UK to operate jet aircraft service when an airline-operated Comet airplane took off from Johannesburg en route to London. In the 60s, the airline extended its orange tail insignia across its entire fleet. It was also in the same decade that the airline started the Wallaby service with a weekly jet service between South Africa and Australia. The airline was also able to expand to South America when it made an inaugural flight from Johannesburg to Rio de Janeiro using a Boeing 707. And for the first time in its history, the airline managed to reach a major milestone by carrying more than 1 million passengers during the 1968-69 financial year. Another major feat was attained on 23rd March 1976 when a South African Boeing 747 special performance plane set a record for the longest non-stop commercial flight when it flew from Seattle, United States to Cape Town, South Africa, a distance of 16,560 kilometers covered in 17 hours and 22 minutes. Due to economic sanctions courtesy of apartheid, flights to New York were suspended in November 1986. The US withdrew from its landing rights in South Africa, and in the following year, the Australian government took the same action against South Africa. However, it was during the 90s that things started looking up for the airline. For example, with the end of apartheid in 1990, South African Airways started services to former and new destinations in Africa and Asia. The airline was able to operate flights via Sudan and Egypt as economic sanctions against the country were lifted, and flights to New York and Australia resumed later on. Domestically, the airline introduced multilingual greetings in English, Zulu, Sotho, and Afrikaans on board domestic flights, while on international flights, passengers were greeted in the relevant language of their destination. It was during the new millennium, however, that the airline registered immense growth, and this was evidenced by the extensive fleet renewal program that the airline embarked on. In this program, the airline would go ahead and appoint Airbus as its supplier and then went on to place a staggering order of 41 new aircrafts with a price tag of $3.5 billion. This still stands as Africa's biggest jetliner acquisition ever. Signs of the company's mismanagement started appearing as early as 2009 when Chief Executive Officer Hayang Kula resigned after being accused of corporate malpractices. In 2010, the company would then go ahead and seek to recover $4 million from Kula for allegedly spending the money on his friends and awarding business deals to organizations and individuals in which he had an interest in. With Kula gone, Chris Smith took over the role of interim CEO from March 2009 to February 2010 when Cesar Msimela was appointed the new CEO of the airline, thus becoming the first female to hold such a position in the company's history. In September 2017, South African Airways began reducing its fleet and expected to cut its flights by 23%. Within the same period and due to the financial distress the company found itself in, the airline financiers started recalling their debt. First to do so was Standard Chartered Bank in June 2017. However, the South African government was able to provide 2.2 billion rands. Citibank was the second bank to recall its debt after it refused to extend that loan facility. Together with some others, another 7.7 billion rands became payable at the end of September 2017. During the administration of President Jacob Zuma, the airline's board was implicated in a number of corruption-related controversies. Most notable were allegations of corrupt or irregular activities by the then company's non-executive director and a Zuma appointee Dudu Myeni, who was widely blamed for placing the airline in serious financial difficulties. On 15th November 2019, the airline was hit by strike actions by unions, although eventually an agreement was reached in principle on 22nd November. That 8-day strike reportedly cost the airline 400 million rands, approximately 50 million rands per day. In the last month of 2019, the airline went into voluntary business rescue, a form of bankruptcy protection similar to Chapter 11 in the United States. This, according to the South African government, was the best way forward for the cash-strapped airline to resolve its myriad financial problems while continuing to operate. Even by the standards of its many years of mounting debt and near permanent uncertainty, it has been a traumatic period for the airline. In order to function optimally, an airline needs to be properly capitalized. This is so because carriers operate in a competitive space characterized by low margins and high volumes. Its high labor cost, an inefficient fleet, and route network are some of the things that has seen it pushed to its death knell. The year 2020 has seen the airline cut down a number of its domestic and international flights. The argument is that these routes are in low demand, but you and I know better. It is estimated that the airline burns between 70 million to 75 million rands per day. With things being as they are, among the many worrying likely outcomes of the process is the loss of jobs. The airline currently employs around 11,000 people. Even with the best of strategies in place and quality executive management teams, most airlines struggle. You add mismanagement, corruption, and looting in that mix, and you get yourself a disastrous combination. Sadly, that is where South African Airways finds itself. Whether it will pull itself out of this muddle, only time will tell.